So the next chapter, I'm going to talk about Marx, mobs, and the media. Life, all of life is a question of your priorities. What are your priorities? In 1867, Marx published Das Kapital, in which he laid out his vision of capitalism and its inevitable tendencies towards self-destruction. And he took part in international workers' movement based on revolutionary theories. Marx's theory evolved into communism, which also denounced all religions, and of course communism was embraced by USSR, China, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. Many of these socialist countries today have self-destructed. Now, communism and socialism began with mob rule, just like we're having today. Violence, toppling statues, and governments trying to establish a new utopian world. Mob rule is malicious destruction of public property or private property, and is not acceptable in any civilized society, especially in America. You cannot learn from history if you attempt to erase it. The mayor in Seattle suggested that mob action is simply a, quote, summer of love, close quotes. In reality, anarchists within these mobs were unwitting persons who rebelled against police authority, rebelled against established order and ruling power, and they were criminals who used violent means. Citizens were injured and killed. They used violent means to overthrow the established order. This is unacceptable in any civilized society. Now, civil disobedience is okay. I mean, Gandhi used peaceful means to achieve his goals in India. The refusal to obey government demands in a nonviolent fashion is okay. It's acceptable under the Constitution's Bill of Rights. However, liberal judges added to this chaos by releasing criminals with minor penalties. Some of these judges are encouraging more violence and mob rule. And our current Vice President Harris collected money to bail them out of jail. They bailed out criminals who hurt people and damaged property. Then the media mania, I call it media mania, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times, have perpetuated the situation further by justifying mob violence and destruction in the name of past minority injustices. They are also promoting the redefinition and elimination of local police forces. We need more police, not less. There's always bad apples in any organization. We can get rid of the bad apples. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We need the police. We already had some bad examples of this chaos in New York City where they cut $1 billion, I think, off the budget, police budget. And we have examples of this in Seattle, Oakland, and Washington, D.C. Who will keep public order without local enforcement of America's federal, state, and city laws? Let's talk about the socialism trends. Have we not learned from history about socialism, the system of government that has failed? Have millenniums missed their history lessons? Or did the extreme left professors who taught them rewrite this part of history? Did they not hear about friends and relatives who shed their blood to maintain the freedoms and rights that they now enjoy? I mean, why would anybody want to send their kid to a university or college where socialism is taught and history is rewritten? That's silly. It's a waste of money and time. Future leaders. Some of those who should know better from history are now running for Congress. So they graduated from the universities where they were taught these socialistic trends and utopia ideas. Now some of them are leaders running for Congress or in Congress. And they're reinventing or trying to reinterpret the Constitution of the United States of America to suit their goals, to gain power at whatever cost. To be sure, Russia and China are supporting their unscrupulous goals. May God save us from this madness, this chaos. Racism. People seem to be lately arguing about racism again. They are toppling statues, burning the American flag. Mobs are rioting in our cities. Why is this happening? Part of the answer is that many of our youth have been idle for too long due to the virus, and unemployed, and clash over whatever seems popular in the media without examining the real facts, the truth of the matter. Some are behaving as if they existed in a kind of tribal or groupthink world. One cannot have a conversation with people like that with an out-of-control mob. People of color. The fact is that 75% of the world's population is people of color. Whites are actually the minorities, 30%. In a court of law, the jury is picked not based on their skin color, their sex, their class, and not as groups. Now let me give you an example which I referred to earlier about Lieutenant William Calley, to talk about group evil. He was the American officer, if you remember, who was convicted by court-martial of premeditated killing 22 unarmed South Vietnamese families. This was groupthink, mob rule. Soldiers under his command went along with the officer's order to kill. It was a clear case of group evil. They should have disobeyed his order, as we should disobey any immoral order from the government. We must always judge persons individually, not as groups or races. As former guardians dealing with neglected and abused young children, my wife and I, we dealt with children aged 10 or less. We found that most of the offenders in the system, juvenile system, were what we might call, quote, white trash, close quotes. The facts are that only about 5% of the black or people of color were guilty of neglect or abuse of their children, compared to 85% of the white parents. One reason might be that black fathers were rarely at home because of the nanny state policies, a negative term that describes government overly intrusiveness in the lives of citizens that seeks to protect minorities from themselves. Whatever the reason, we should never label groups of people with such broad paintbrush. We judge people by who they are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We should judge all persons, including presidents, governors, mayors, and police officers, by what they actually do, not by what they think or say. We all say and write dumb things from time to time, as this writer has frequently done. We continue to grow emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, and society's expressions change as we fine-tune and revise the words we use, which still imperfectly expresses our true thoughts. So growing up involves learning, exploring, adapting, correcting who we are, who we were, to whatever we now have become. Growing requires constant revisions of thinking, like writing a book, trying to get your ideas out on paper, or making a painting when the colors or the composition is not what it should be. Yet eventually we have to publish. We have to finish the painting. Although it does not fully express our true feelings at that point, it gets better the next time around. Why is this so? Because we are imperfect beings that evolve and must always try to reach for the stars, even though they are very far above us. We seek, but we cannot find. Yet by the very act of seeking, we achieve something good, although it's not perfect goodness. For it is the Lord we are seeking, who is perfection, who is mercy and love itself. Mob rule should never be allowed in this country, no matter what their complaints are. And the opposite of rule of law is chaos. In my opinion, the best way to control extremist protests and avoid possible violence is to surround the area with barriers, cut off their electricity, cut off their water and food supplies, and it will end promptly in a few days. When mob leaders finally give up their weapons and come out peacefully, the leaders need to be arrested, especially if they injured anyone or damaged property. To do otherwise is to encourage more extremist protests and more violence in other cities. We have to nip the violence before it spreads. Some minority groups have valid complaints which need addressing. However, mob rule will never solve anything and will lead to more chaos. As written in my article, which was published in LinkedIn and Facebook, it's called The Perfect Storm. The key solutions are: democracy requires educated, informed citizens who vote and assimilate into American culture and are willing to obey all just laws. So the key here is education, being informed, and voting, and assimilating into society. It all starts with the family. If 70 to 75% of black children lack a father to guide them, and the single mom's too busy existing to find time to teach them, how can their children grow up to become good citizens? The answer is someone must step in and take on this responsibility. The economy should provide good paying jobs for minorities. And they must avoid the nanny state entitlements such as food stamps, government handouts, that create even more and more dependency. Who promoted minority dependency policies in these troubled cities during the past decades? You know who they are. Will the minorities re-elect them again?